I call Kelvin Davis.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, I'd like to start off by talking about the police as well, and I noticed the speaker who just finished said that the National Party is putting more emphasis on victims. Let me tell you now, Mr. Chair, the resolution rates for high-volume crimes such as burglary and car theft are below 10%. Now, if they're really serious about the needs of victims, the first thing the national government would do would be to address those low resolution rates. You can't tell me that any criminal or burglar would be put off from committing those crimes if they knew they had a 90% chance or greater than 90% chance of getting away successfully. One of the reasons, though, that these resolution rates are so low is because the police are being continually asked to do more with less. There's a $15 million cut to the police budget this year. I know the Minister of Police denied that, but the first thing in the Auditor General's report at Select Committee was to confirm that there was a $15 million decrease in the police budget. And in real terms, over the last 4 or 5 years, there's been about a $300 million decrease in the police budget. So continuously, the police are being asked to do more with less. I believe there's a police wage round going on, and police general duties constables have had an increase maybe over the last 4 or 5 years in their salaries of about $5,000. While at the same time, in the period since I think 2009 to 2013, the police commissioner has had a $100,000 rise in his salary. I'd like to think that the police, the guys the men and women on the ground who are doing the hard work, who are putting themselves in the front line there and in harm's way, would get a wage increase relative to what the police commissioner does. But that said, if they were to get a substantial salary increase, which I believe they deserve, then that would mean there would be further cuts in other areas, such as police cars or maybe some of the technology that's being rolled out. There's been an 18% drop in general duties constables over the last little while as well, Mr. Chair. Sexual assault and violent assaults are areas on the rise, and in fact the statistics say that 5% of sexual assault is reported, and of that 5%, only 1% will ever see a conviction, and that's just simply unacceptable. We need to have a greater emphasis on the investigation of sexual assaults. We need to take it a lot more seriously, and also violent assaults as well, Mr. Speaker. So the policing budget has an emphasis on revenue gathering policing, such as intersection behaviour and lane changing compliance, use of mobile phones and warrants and certificates of fitness, which we can understand that there is some emphasis on that, Mr. Chair, and that people do or can be killed and are killed by vehicle sort of violations and that. But the reality is that we also need to have an equal emphasis on those high volume crimes, such as burglary, such as the sexual assaults, such as the violent assaults as well, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to also talk about the speeding up of court processes that the previous member spoke about now, and it's a nice segue into the corrections debacle. Now, some of the things that we're hearing around the botch-ups at Serco with all the lockdowns that are going on, that lawyers are having difficulty getting access to their clients. In fact, instead of being able to spend 2 or 3 days preparing cases with their clients, lawyers are having to spend 2 or 3 days just trying to track down where their clients have been transferred to. There's a lack of communication, and so when clients finally get in touch with their lawyers, or lawyers in touch with their clients, they have a very short time to actually prepare a case, and it's basically causing a log jam in the courts, Mr. Chair. So the whole corrections episode with Serco shows that the government's privatisation agenda is a complete and utter failure. One of the whole issue around Serco, or one of the main issues around Serco, is the fact that it's a business and they want to make a profit, and so they cut corners. And one of the main corners that they're cutting is the lack of staffing, Mr. Chair.
Kelvin Davis.
So in terms of lack of staffing in the contract, Serco doesn't actually have to have a prisoner to corrections officer ratio, which is outrageous. So in the general rule of thumb is that there should be one corrections officer for every 20 inmates. If it's higher security, then it should be 1 to about 15. This stories emerging from Serco is that at times there's one corrections officer looking after up to 55 inmates. You can understand how those Serco guards would be hesitant to get out into the general population if there was some sort of fracas that broke out. Their lives are in danger and they don't have their colleagues there to help them get out of it. I've also been told that most of the contraband that comes into Serco is via guards who, because there aren't enough guards to check other guards coming in, that the guards are able to bring in contraband. Now, if you go to corrections-run prisons and anybody who goes through is searched. Now, the other day I was down at Otago Correctional Facility and we're led around by the head of the facility himself. Now, when he came out to greet us and he had to go back in, he had to remove his belt and his keys and his watch and his shoes and everything. Apparently in Serco, there's just not enough staff to be able to monitor other staff coming in. And when you're as poorly paid as the Serco guards, it's quite tempting to bring in contraband and to actually get paid for it. So what actually happens is that the inmates have access to cell phones, as we all know, because they've been taking the videos of themselves in the fight clubs. They're also able to ring outside and make arrangements for payments to guards who have brought in contraband. I spoke to a Serco guard who didn't want to be named, obviously, because his life would be in jeopardy if he was named, and he told me this outrageous figure. In fact, it was so outrageous I didn't believe him. I said, well, how much can a guard get? What's in it for him if he brought in a packet of cigarettes? He said, on the outside, if a guard brings in a packet of cigarettes on the outside, he can get $1,000. I actually didn't believe him, but the very next day I met with an inmate who had been released the day before. And I said to him, look, I've heard this outrageous story about the value that for a packet of cigarettes. You tell me, because I just want to confirm this. He said actually for a 50-gram pack of tobacco, a guard can get $800 for 50 grams worth of tobacco. Now, if you're a guard and you can get $1,000 for bringing in one packet of cigarettes, you may as well bring in 10 packets of cigarettes and get $10,000. It sounds outrageous, but that's the black market value within prisons of this type of contraband. A cell phone is valued at over $1,000. And those cell phones are not only being used to, as we know, organise a meth ring from in the inside, they're also being used to intimidate families. So there was an inmate whose mother got a phone call saying, if you don't put money into a certain bank account, well, then your son will get the bash. There's the review of Serco, Mr. Speaker, to me is going to be a whitewash because it's Serco reviewing itself and corrections reviewing Serco, and there's the Ombudsman floating around somewhere. It's interesting because we know Serco is such a mess that the Minister has got Serco to review themselves, but when we come down to Tony Robertson and Daniel Livingston, the inmate Livingston who cut off his, it is Tony Robertson. We know that actually corrections did a good job in monitoring him while he was on release, but it's interesting that the Minister's gone and got an independent person to review them, knowing that the review will come out well, because Corrections Chief Probation Officer Darius Fagan actually did a review a couple of weeks back and said, you know, that they actually did a very good job of it. So I asked the question, why is there an independent review of one aspect of corrections when they already know that they've done well? And yet when it's looking at Serco gets to review themselves, Corrections gets to review Serco. The terms of reference around Robertson, the first term of reference is the management of Robertson prior and following his release. Well, that's already been done by Darius Fagan. Then the second term of reference is the way the government...
I call Dennis O'Rourke.
Mr. Chairman, I want to